Okay, Autumn, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being with us. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, yeah, thank you so much for taking the time today. I've recently finished your book, and first of all, wow, it's a really incredible story, and you also write with such passion and detail and fluidity and beauty. It's really quite remarkably well written, as well as being a great story.
Thank you.
Um, And you've got a copy of it right there. Can you I
I
listened
do.
to it on audiobook, so I don't have it, but if you can show it, there you go.
This
A
one
prom
here, can you see
a,
it?
a Promise of Hope by Autumn Stringham. Yeah, a really
Yep.
incredible book.
HarperCollins put a little subtitle on there that takes up half the cover, but that was a bit of sass on their part, and I appreciated it at the time when we were battling with the Canadian government. So they figured they could say whatever they wanted.
There you go. I
Yeah.
like a bit of sass. That's great. Um, for those who don't know who you are and who haven't read the book, can you
Mhm.
maybe give us a little bit of like detail about what it is and why did you write it?
Yeah, my name's Autumn Stringham. I'm the second born daughter to Debbie and Tony Steffen. Um, my mom was really quite sick and got sicker as I grew older. And the book is actually a story about um, living with a bipolar mom and then ultimately becoming her. And then the incredible solution that my dad ended up coming up with that ultimately saved my life and allowed me to be a happy, healthy mom. So my story actually ended and began 25 years ago when life took a really big switch. And this is my 25 years away from psych meds. And so it's a good year to be doing this interview. It's my 25th.
Wow. 25 years off all psychiatric medications. That's incredible.
It's been incredible, really, really life changing for me.
I genuinely don't think there's a lot of people that can say that.
No, I don't think it's common. Well, it's becoming more common. I've seen a lot of people over the years who have transitioned to more natural ways of doing things using my dad's formulation, using Empower Plus, and then actually sticking with it. And if they can get past that first year with some difficulty, usually there's difficulty if they've been heavily medicated, like I was. Um, if they get past that first year, they can go the distance. And I've seen people stick around for 15, 20 years. I've got friends who have been on for 20 years. So
All right. So yeah, the book primarily, from my perspective anyway, it's a story of you living with your mother who was quite ill at the time,
mhm.
and your mother's a very, very key figure in the book. And I find it really interesting that whilst reading the book, I could really feel that you're on this like constant high alert, like high stress, sympathetic nervous system, like always kind of like on the go. And it
Mm.
seems to me like you're always attempting to try and be aware of like which mother you might be interacting with, whether it's I think you say this in your book, whether it's the fun mum, the dark mum, the scary or blank mum.
Mhm.
You didn't know who would be coming down the stairs. Do you recall that kind of mental conscious awareness you had to have to be on alert to kind
Yeah.
of recognize that different person that might be coming down the stairs, and what was that like?
I actually think that's a common experience for kids who are growing up in high stress or traumatic situations. And I think for children, consistency is really, really important because even small traumas can feel massive to a child. Unfortunately, my mom's the trauma that we experienced with my mom really wasn't minor, and so there were times when um, scary mom showed up, and the impact was huge, and lifelong. I think there are still times when I find myself going into that sympathetic nervous system fight or flight, and I have to really use some tools and skills that I've learned to take myself out and get present again. Because even as a grandmother now, there are times when you're dealing with little kids or grandkids, and I remember those times of being vulnerable and young and not really able to protect myself. So yeah, that kind of
Yeah,
stuff lasts for a lifetime.
yeah, certainly. And this it's so important to have those tips and those tools to be able to like utilize quite quickly, so that
Yeah, but
whole
that's learned stuff.
yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah.
practice for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, so that kind of idea of like, who you might have to be dependent on who your mother is, that kind of constant stressful state, you're always having to balance which personality to express for you
Hmm.
dependent on your mother. And that must have been really exhausting and quite difficult for you,
Hmm.
as a young woman, as a young person, to establish your own identity because of that. So do you correlate that experience as a young person to any like personal identity struggles?
Yes, I do. And in fact, I was just talking to my dad about this. I think yesterday we were talking. A member of my mom's family has passed away, and so we were just kind of remembering together and talking about some things. And I said, even after all these years, I feel like the only emotion for me that is safe to show that doesn't have a full body physical reaction with it is anger. I'm safe in anger. So if I'm hurt or if I'm sad, I am much safer to come off angry. And I think that's the only emotion I was allowed to show as a child that wasn't met with mockery, right? So, and I mean, that's a reflection on how my mom grew up. Um, it's funny because, they say bipolar and mental illness is genetic, but I think it's also um, survivalism in some way, and people are surviving their parents. So if there's chemistry involved, yes. If there's genetics involved, absolutely, those things can be passed on. But so are the survival mechanisms. And so, yeah, having to adjust to my mom and not wanting to be mocked. Uh, yeah, anger was pretty much the safest place to be. Crying, vulnerability, too happy, sad, whatever, that was never okay.
Yeah,
So,
I think you're spot on in regards to, obviously there's genetical factors when it comes to anything that we potentially might inherit, but
yeah,
the environment and the habits and the survival instincts that we also inherit from our from our parents absolutely play a part in our destinies as kids and as adults as well.
yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
You talk through the book about your girl, and I
Mhm.
really liked how you brought this entity to life throughout the
Mhm.
book. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about the girl.
Yeah, my girl in the back brain. Um, gosh, I get that it was really weird, and um, eventually it became an invasive mechanism, technique,
Right.
survival technique. But for all the times that I needed to protect myself from big, big stuff, big trauma, big fear. That having my girl in the back brain was a really big blessing. It was a welcomed relief. She was a welcome relief. So the first time I remember experiencing um, kind of a part of me apart from myself, who was very logical and calming um, and I felt protective, was when shortly after my grandfather's suicide, my mom's dad, her teenage brothers came to live with us, and one of them had a lot of problems, and he continued to have problems through his life until he ended up in jail over it. But he sort of took out a lot of his pain, I think, on me and my sisters. And so that was my first experience in realizing like I had kind of shattered a little bit with a really terrifying experience with him. And then I think my girl became a bit of a habit. So there were other times with my mom when she was really sick and when she felt like we would all be better off dead. That was another time when my girl came into play. And I think you see her throughout the book, just conversations. It seemed like the sicker that I got and the older I got, and particularly after my mother's suicide. I'm giving away a lot of the book, but um, in those really big traumatic times, I really leaned heavily. So she she was still a habit for me and still a survival mechanism even after my initial recovery as my chemistry started to straighten out.
Hmm.
But I started getting really uncomfortable with her and started realizing this is just me. There's a part of me that started realizing this is just me, and this is silly. And then when I started realizing that I didn't have full color memories, that everything was kind of black and white and flat, I decided to be whole and healthy. I would need to have that back. And so I actually went through a process when I was about 27 where I started studying a lot about this kind of incorporation and healing. I did a lot of reading and a lot of praying, a lot of meditating, and that was the year that I became pregnant with my daughter, and everything kind of came full circle. But it was really painful, um, because I think when you're used to being able to duck out of a super stressful situation and feel like it's not your problem and you can kind of dissociate from that, uh, it was hard to stand in one place and experience things wholly all by myself.
Yeah. In-
Anyway, that's a
Interesting.
long answer. Sorry.
No, no, that's great because I feel like even just trying for yourself to think back and try and understand your girl, and obviously, now how old were you when you can first recall
5.
5? I mean, like, 5 years old, and
Mhm,
you're having this internal dialogue. There's no way you can possibly try and understand that that's actually you talking to yourself. So as you develop and your girl develops and you get older, I'm sure that understanding completely changes and the
mhm.
relationship with it.
Yeah, and really, I've heard it said from other people who have experienced this kind of a yeah, survival mechanism. It really is a gift on some level. Like I think it's a kindness that it happens, because yeah, when you're 5, how else are you going to deal with a situation like that? And if you don't feel safe and you can't tell other people what's going on, who will you tell, right?
Yeah, survival mechanism for sure. Like, our bodies and our brains are so incredible, and to give you that gift when you really needed it, I think that's really important. I know a part in my life when I feel like I was living very subconsciously. I was just habitually doing things, and I wasn't really, like, my brain and my body weren't really communicating. And then when I started to practice a little bit more about meditation and how I felt a bit more responsible for my emotional states, I started to be able to actually, you know, listen to the internal dialogue that was always there, kind of
Hmm.
that intellectual side of things. And it's really profound when you know that you kind of got that ability. But I love that it came to you at such a young age when you really needed it.
Yeah, I think the experience I was having with my uncle, and I look back on photos, and he was like 13. He was still just a chubby faced little kid, but in my little girl mind, he was a daunting character, and I was terrified,
Yeah.
and and there was a real loss of innocence in all of that too. So I feel like, yeah, I needed to have a little split where I could just tuck all of that and say, my girl will talk about that later. But right now, I'm just going to be 5. Yeah,
Okay.
it's
Okay.
important.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's shift a little bit. So when you first started taking the supplement regime, you kind of went through like a sleep detox.
I
Yeah.
wish it was a sleep detox. It was more like a screaming, spitting, vomiting
Oh,
detox
really?
first.
Okay.
Oh,
I just
yeah.
I remember reading the part when you're basically being kind of like, when you were awake, you kind of basically being fed these supplements by your
Mhm.
father and your partner, and then it seemed to be like you were just like in and out of consciousness, and especially like during that time when you're transitioning from being on these really harsh medications to this like
Mhm.
this balance and transition period. um yeah, I didn't quite get the
No, you're right. You're right about that. There was like a week where
okay.
I was still heavily medicated, like a 5-drug cocktail, and on a massive dose of the mineral concoction. And yeah, so I was sleeping a lot. And then when I stopped taking 3 of the 5 meds cold turkey, that's when the screaming and vomiting started. But that
Okay,
was, yeah, a
but
few days in.
it was a tough period of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. You've got some experience with psychiatric wards in Canada.
Yes.
What was that experience like?
Um, so I wanted to be there. I was, I didn't want to be sick, but when I realized that I really wasn't functioning, I was feeling like quite a failure, and then really afraid that my son might find me dead. Um, I felt like the safest place for me was the hospital. So the first time that I went in, um, it was me saying, I need to go to the hospital. And then they realized I needed to be there. I think the second time was a different situation where I was just having a tantrum in the middle of the night with using a belt sander to um, redo some of our furnishings, and like very, very, very manic, very sick. And I was brought in at that point by my husband. And I think that there were a few other times as well. That whole period of time is mud for me.
Okay.
Like I have to go back into my medical records and really look at it. And that's how I ended up writing my timeline for my book. I had to go back through medical records and journals and drawings and things, and put together the dates, because it was during that period that I tried 13 different psych medications, and I was in and out of the hospital and sometimes on an outpatient basis. So yeah, not a lot of memories about that. But I know that later on I was terrified when I was no longer medicated and I was functioning in the community and raising my kid and staying in my marriage and all of that. I was terrified that they might find me out and make me go back. Um, it wasn't it wasn't pleasant.
Okay.
Uh,
Um, and I mean, this next question I've got for you is, and it's kind of loaded, and it's kind of, and it's a kind of an opinion piece from me. But correct me if I'm wrong.
okay.
Here goes. Um, when it comes to supporting or helping individuals with severe mental pathologies such as bipolar, how wrong does our conventional system have it?
Okay. 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 I'm not anti-medication. I do think that if you're going to kill yourself, and you really are, going to sleep for a few days is a better option, and then wake up and renegotiate that. However, that's the extent of the value that I see in psychiatric medications. I think that it's for acute emergency situations, and I don't believe that it's the answer to mood lability. I just don't. I think that if somebody is struggling with rage and moodiness and they're all over the map and up and down like that, there's probably triggers, real life triggers that need to be addressed, um, trauma that needs to be addressed. And that's not easy, um, especially if somebody's sick. It's not easy. So I really think that getting people's chemistry straight at the source of the problem is a great way to help support someone through healing. But medicating and sedating and manipulating moods with constant meds, I just don't think that I've never seen it work for anybody.
Just such a short term, really kind of narrow way of looking at something.
Mhm.
Obviously, I think conventional medicine is phenomenal when it comes to emergency medicine.
Yeah.
There's no question about that.
Oh
But
yeah.
when it comes to chronic disease and concerns and issues, yeah, they're not quite got it right. And you've obviously got a lot of experience with the medication side, the
Yeah.
therapy side, the psychiatric wards. So yeah, and obviously their resources are not always incredible.
That's it right there, though. You
Yeah.
just nailed it. It comes down to resources, manpower, a patient's willingness to actually do work on it, and sometimes that's determined by family situations and survival mechanisms. So it is a complicated thing,
Hmm.
but I really think large scale meds are used as patient management and not really about healing. And
Yeah.
maybe doctors need to just realize that it's possible to get better. that it's actually possible to heal and change. And if
Yeah.
they don't believe that, then I guess patient management is just as good as it gets, right?
Yeah, I just think that the way that our medical professionals are taught around mental health, and we're kind of, they're kind of taught about symptoms and medications. I
Hmm.
think that if they had a blank check and they had all the money in the world, I still think that with the current way that they're doing this, I think they would still struggle and probably waste that money. I think it would be it needs to be a whole overhaul of what mental health means, and to
Yeah.
individualize that, because obviously everybody's journey and circumstances and root cause is going to be different.
Well, and when you even just consider something like my girl in the back brain, some people might consider that to be an illness, but I think that she was a key to my wellness.
Yeah.
Like, so giving me a drug to stop that conversation may not be the best treatment, right? Addressing the conversation, wondering why I'm having it to begin with, might have been a better choice. So,
Yeah, I don't know how you could conclude that right away as being like a problem. Like a
yeah,
like rather than like being open to the idea that that might be something that's happening in a positive way.
right,
Because given a lot of circumstances, the brain and the body don't really make mistakes.
right, exactly. I think you're right about that. Yeah.
Okay, okay, great answer. Thank you. Can you tell us about your kind of life experience with Health Canada? We've had Sean Buckley on the show, and I was lucky enough to meet him, and we did it in person. And
Uh-huh.
a really, really amazing, fascinating guy,
Hmm.
really smart chap. And we had a really interesting conversation about the primary health authority in Canada as Health Canada and what their main role is. And I'll ask you the same question I asked him: is like, do you think that they serve the Canadian public?
Oh no. Oh no, no. Come on. Of course they don't. No. I'd like to think that there could be a bureaucratic, unelected body that is bribe proof, but I just don't think that's the case. Gosh, I thought I was going to answer that so nice and delicate and everything, but no. I think that they are serving. Excuse me. I think that they are serving um, a completely different purpose. And I think money matters. I think lobby matters. I know lobby matters. And frankly, I think that when I was a Canadian living in Canada,
Hmm.
I was a sacrifice they were willing to make. Like they didn't care if how I was doing or if I lived or died. It was just a number. So my experience was not positive when I went and stood on Parliament Hill with 8 other women in the same situation as me, long-term consumers of a product that was safe and effective. And having not been medicated for 7 years, I was pregnant at the time with my 3rd daughter, so my 4th child, and 6 months pregnant, and I get a letter telling me to go back on standard treatment because I can't take vitamins and minerals anymore. Come on. That if anybody was interested in the health of the Canadian citizen, they would have been all over that story and begging for more research, not shutting it down.
Yeah, and
So I don't know what they're
yeah,
like now. I'm out. I moved to the United States and I live in a state where I can choose a lot of things. But
yeah, I feel
it never,
like a lot of people who share your opinion and mine and Sean's, they actually have a lot more experience with Health Canada rather than just, okay, yeah, they take care of the health of Canadians, so therefore, they're a government entity, therefore they must be looking after our best interests. Like obviously
no.
that's just unfortunately factually not the case when you look at how they run their business. So, um, yeah, that's yeah,
Well, and I mean, really, and I'm not bashing the whole system. I think every system is broken, and every country could do better than they're doing. But when you consider that there's a bottom line there too, right? Like, um, and it's all about the deal that they make with the provider. So there are so many financial factors in there, And then the fact that it's free means that you don't get to choose. They tell you what they're going to provide and what you're allowed to use or take. And I don't want anything free from anybody if they get to make choices like that for me.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you are speaking and working and researching for the people, you have to be engaged with them and recognizing what they're actually going through. And for a medication to have the effect or the positive effect that um, Empower Plus and the supplements you guys were taking, that would be a world class
Right.
phenomenon. But to not even consider it because of certain, you know, kind of backhanded things. It's just really controversial, and the revolving
Yeah.
door of all those things. Yeah, we could talk about that for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. So, you quote your father in the book a bunch of times,
Yeah.
and I mean, I've met your dad a bunch of times. I love him. He's awesome. He's a wonderful person, and we've had him on the show before. And yeah, so you quote him, and he says, "I've never known such closed-minded individuals as doctors. Scientists are the real thinkers." So, with all your experience with doctors and scientists, meeting them and speaking with them and reading what they've written, do you agree with your dad?
Yes. Well, I don't think it's a doctor's job to be open-minded. I think a doctor is trained to memorize symptoms and drug treatments and clinical practice guidelines, and to logically unfold what they've been taught. But they're not looking outside the box. That's not their job. So it's not necessarily against doctors. It's just outside of their training. They're not nutritionists, and they're not interested. It doesn't fit into the clinical practice guidelines here in the United States. Um, they are kind of in the same situation as Canadian doctors. Canadian doctors have to go by clinical practice guidelines outlined for them by Health Canada. And so, if somebody comes with this, then this, then this, then this, right? It's the same thing here with individual practices or when they make their deals with insurance companies. They can't step outside of those guidelines either, or they risk losing their practice. So, yeah, not um, they're logical, but not necessarily creative thinkers. And I don't think that's their job. A scientist, on the other hand, has the responsibility to think way outside the box, to be curious, instead of just dismissing everything as anecdotal and not in the DSM, you know, um, being curious and wondering why that might be, and then looking into it. So I have a lot of respect for that career choice. I think that um, I don't know. If I had it to do all over again and a better brain, I probably would have chosen to be a scientist because
Cool.
I am curious and I wonder
Yeah.
when something's working, why is it working? And
Yeah.
when it's not
Yeah.
working, why is it not working? You know?
Yeah. Asking those big questions and trying to prove yourself wrong is
Yeah.
very interesting. Yeah, I completely agree with you, and that's a perfect answer. Thank you. Who's the hero in the book? Is there one? Are there multiple heroes?
Hmm. I
Doesn't have
think
to.
I have three heroes. There's three,
Okay.
four heroes.
All right. I like it.
I'm gonna do it like the sports, gratitude speech or whatever.
It's like a Marvel movie. There's
Like to
four
thank
heroes.
God.
Yeah.
No, really. Okay. So ultimate healing came to me when I was able to forgive a lot of um, a lot of wrongs done and a lot of things overlooked and missed. And so I think the greatest hero in there is honestly um, he who has led me to a place where I really can forgive. And that's been huge for me. So I think the greatest hero is the Savior, in Jesus Christ. Honestly, when if you ask my dad how these answers came to him, everything, everything, including my real healing and my ability to be a mother and get past all the hurt, um, comes down to that, to
Awesome.
that ability to just forgive and let go. Um, and then I have to say that there are three men in my life who I just honor as heroes, and that would be my dad, His original business partner, David Hardy, huge thinker. My dad is such a fighter, and my husband was such a stayer because I gave him every reason to leave, and he stayed, And some of his insight into my real pain, in conversations in the middle of the night, led me to understand what I needed to forgive to begin with. So I've been really blessed to have amazing men in my life, and I don't think that's something you hear very often, given the
Sure.
current media. But
Yeah. Now that's
truly
wonderful.
blessed.
Yeah, that sounds like a dream team around there for sure. And that's um, when it comes to the healing of anything, we have to be. We can't just think of like one thing. We can't just think medication, or we can't just think nutrition. We have to be thinking
Yeah.
all of these things. And if you've got your dad, who's this incredibly highly motivated fighter, and you've got your partner who's so supportive and understanding and forgiving, and then you've got David Hardy as well, who's like a really smart thinker, really creative. Like you've just you've kind of got like every aspect of that discovery of healing kind of covered. I think that's like that's amazing.
Yeah,
That's heroic. There's no doubt about it.
truly.
Um, Hypothetically, if your dad didn't exist in this whole story, with your experience with so many people who have experienced the harshness of bipolar and other disorders, without your dad's motivation, strength, faith, perseverance, what do you think your life and destiny would have been? Because I think a lot of people might experience these things without your dad, for example.
Oh, I know exactly who I'd be. Um, uh, Massively overweight recluse in a trailer home with a lot of books. Period.
So you've obviously thought about that before.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
there's no chance that I would have been able to stave off the addictive behaviors that absolutely I would have had to go to for self medication. And if I had stayed on the medication, I'd be dead already. I was not. No, I was never going to be okay. So if I survived, I would have had to just withdraw, and there's no way that I could function in society at all. If uh, if I hadn't stayed on the medication but had stayed sick, I don't know. I think it's between suicide and total
Yeah. Okay.
mess.
I,
Yeah.
I appreciate your honesty there. Thank you very much. Yeah, because I think not everybody would have had the team that you had around them.
Mm-mm.
And like right now, as we speak, there'll be people who are going through such very very difficult things without that, and that's a
Yeah.
massive part of the problem, obviously.
Look, I've
Yeah.
tried to help people. I've had conversations with women like me, who are sick, you know, in real time, like I was, and without support, the fear of even getting better, like the thought that they might be employable, or the thought that they might have a responsibility that goes beyond collecting the check or checking themselves into the hospital is just so overwhelming. They can't even imagine a normal life. And so yeah, having familial support and a good community around me was a huge factor in allowing me to get past that first year, and then just trust that um even without disability I could still be okay, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. For people who have a friend or a family member, or maybe a student in a class or something, who they might suspect struggling with a mental health condition, what advice would you have for them? Are there any signs that you might look out for?
I think there's two people that struggle, the two kinds of people that struggle. There's the person that struggles that wants to get better and recognizes that they're struggling. And then there's the person that is struggling and needs to be right, and maybe has some personality disorder surrounding trauma that really isn't approachable about that. And so the approach is very, very different. If you have a friend who is struggling and they know it, then I think being very open about the struggle is really important. And with kindness and acceptance, just recognizing that this is an illness like any other. even if it starts with circumstantial stress, that eventually that gets to your brain. And so when you're dealing with a brain that is not functioning, at optimum level, like, it's okay to talk about that the same way that you would talk about the broken leg or diabetes, right? I was one of those people that knew I was struggling and wanted to get better. So I didn't, I wasn't insulted when someone offered help, right? But I've also seen people who are gravely insulted when someone offers help, and that's a whole different situation. You have to let them hit rock bottom and they have to discover it on their own that they need help. So I think just being an example of health and happiness and gently, hey, you ever need anything, I'm here for you, then they know where to go, right?
Yeah, because these things they don't happen overnight, right? It's not like,
Gosh, no.
it's years in many cases. So absolutely, yeah, it's yeah, that's interesting. Thank you.
Mm.
From from all your experience with mental illness and drug interactions, side effects, etc., and I know you've done so much research in regards to all of this. Have you Was there ever a really shocking discovery that you found whilst going through kind of the publications and the research?
I think the correlation between breast cancer and antidepressant use really shocked me.
Can you tell us a bit more about that?
I don't know the numbers off the top of my head anymore. It's been years since I read that stuff, but I just knew that that was something I could never do again. Like,
Okay.
I realized, wow, which part is life threatening? Sometimes the cure can be worse than the illness, really. And I think that people really need to take responsibility for the outcome and don't use a medication you don't understand. So if you need to use a medication, research it and then weigh out those pros and cons. Don't be afraid, but weigh out the pros and cons for yourself and decide, make an educated decision. Um, Sticking our head in the sand and just swallowing whatever is handed to us is really unwise. And I think it just promotes um, victim culture when people end up with the results of that choice and don't feel like they actually picked it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a lot of really uh, big potential for harm with certain medications, but also for some people, it's a necessary scale. You know.
Absolutely. Yeah, and being your own kind of health advocate and doing a little bit of research and asking questions to doctors, I think is a really important part of the process because if you're just taking something for taking something, I feel like you're creating more of an internal divide and you're separating yourself even more from what's going on for you.
Well, and it's got to go beyond asking your doctor because half the time your doctor doesn't know.
Okay.
So it's not your doctor's job to know the ins and outs of every medication. That's the pharmaceutical company. They do the research and then they choose what information they're going to give to the doctor and they give it in a little presentation or a pamphlet
Hmm.
or a extra credit class or whatever. So they're just they're able to relay what they know, but they are not psychopharmacologists. They are the doctor, the prescriber.
Yeah.
And so to say my doctor didn't tell me, I think that is a bad excuse.
It's a lazy
Um,
excuse for
it
sure.
is.
Yeah.
My morning reading often is looking up a medication that I've heard of or that someone has suggested that I take or that my kids take or whatever, and then reading all the shallow salesy stuff that they
Hmm.
have to say about it, and then digging way deeper. There's always the links at the bottom where they link to all the studies, and people need to learn how to read, and then read it and
Yeah.
really like look at the data and really consider what you're putting in your mouth.
Yeah. That's strong advice. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, what is I remember in your book you wrote there was a part in the book and a part in your life. I think it was on this kind of like road to recovery where you talk about how a shower was a miracle. Um, so like what can you describe what the promise of hope is? And is it's not is it the same for everybody?
Well, I mean, I think everybody's illness is different.
Hmm.
For me, when my editor suggested that we call the book "A Promise of Hope," I originally called it "These Painted Wings," and it was in reference to the forgiving my mom when I saw that I was her, and that her pain, um, my pain was a shallower reflection of hers, and that, by forgiving her, I could also move forward and all of that, right? When he went with "A Promise of Hope" as the title, I felt like I needed to explain that to myself, like,
Yeah.
because it is different for everyone. For me, I think the promise of hope that I received was really in an experience that kept me from committing suicide one day, and it was just that idea that there was life after all of this, and that there would be hope. And it was long before my dad's discovery. It was really a spiritual experience for me that I talk about in my book. Um, but I think for other people, sometimes a show like yours is the promise of hope. Just the idea that somebody is talking honestly and openly about things that most people know better than to talk about.
Hmm.
Um, most people that experience things like my girl in the back brain know better than to talk about that, because they know that that's odd, right?
Yeah.
So I think just being open, a more open society, talking about real things, and normalizing abnormal experience is really, um, that is hopeful for people.
Absolutely. Being comfortable in uncomfortable situations, I think, is a very important thing for everybody to learn. Because yeah, if we just kind of go along with what's happening and we don't think, feel, or say things that we feel that don't fall into the norms,
Yeah.
we're always just going to kind of just be cruising by, and you're not really going to create any change if it's predictable and it's familiar and it's known. It's not really going to work like that.
Yeah, it's true. I think that people, okay, so I attend a church, right? And there's like 300 people in the congregation. And everybody knows, well, many people know my story because we're Facebook friends also, or they've caught little bits of gossip here and there about who I used to be, right?
Okay.
And I don't talk to anyone else about anyone else's story. I only talk about my own. So it's really fun to see how many families will come here and ask for help, but don't want anyone else to know. And yet they're all sitting in the same building every Sunday. Like it's so common. Hallucination is common. Um, Trauma is common. Having been abused is super common. It's really common. And we all
Yeah.
try to live our lives like it's not. And we all think that we're alone in the world. And I wish I could just, grab the pulpit and just be like, hey, it's all of you, you know? Right? Like, open up,
Yeah.
support each other a little better. It's all of you.
These are commonalities that connect us.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if people understood that and weren't so ashamed of it, they might actually do some healing instead of hiding.
Absolutely, because yeah, we internalize it. We make it all about like us, and we're not normal, and we're strange, and we have to pretend to be this person that we think other people want us to be. Like, yeah, it's very confusing and it's very
Yeah.
inauthentic, and yeah, it doesn't create those kind of connections, especially in like a community and in a group
Hmm.
that is all about healing and forgiveness and joy and gratitude and all those things. Yeah, you kind of expect it to be a little bit different in those settings.
But maybe it's the lack of hope for healing. Like, maybe it's the idea that we've all been sold this notion that there's no cure. So if there's no cure, then there's no hope, right? So
Just get
why
on
would
with
you
it.
talk about it? Yeah. Maybe that's where the shame part comes in
Interesting.
having something that's absolutely cannot be helped. And really, I mean, in a faithful community, you think that they believe otherwise, right? But
Yeah.
yeah.
So your the book. What kind of what's the timeline from like your age at the beginning and then when you're done with the book?
Oh, okay. So I was 4, I think, in my first memory of my mom in
Okay.
the garden. And I think it takes us through the battle, so I would have been 32.
Okay. Is there going to be a part two?
I'm living it right now.
Is there going to be a part two that I can read?
No, no, I'm thinking about it. I've messed around a few times, but I think I have more to go. I actually was just recently diagnosed with narcolepsy, which is interesting to me because I suspect that a lot of my original symptoms that were untreatable and completely blown up by psychiatric medications were probably early signs of narcolepsy. So
Interesting.
kind of interesting, but that's a whole nother story, I think.
Okay. Okay. Um, how can people connect with you, Autumn? Where can people pick up the book? I listened to it on Audible.
Yes, and it's
Yeah.
no longer available on Audible.
Oh,
So when I recorded that book, it was in a studio in Toronto, and um, we HarperCollins had contracted with a record maker. So I went in and did it in their studio, and it was one of the earlier um, versions
okay.
of audiobook. So it was originally put out on CDs, and then um, they were able to take it and put it into an Audible. And something with the technology doesn't allow it to be sped up and slowed down in a normal way, the way that
Oh, I know what you mean.
audiobooks are read. So
Hmm.
they've pulled it off. So they just gave me back um, my audio rights to the
Right.
book. And I'm actually thinking I might just read it in a podcast and give it away
Why
for
not?
free since I can. But
Yeah.
so right now, paperback is the only way to get it, and it is on Amazon. It's available anywhere books are sold through HarperCollins, so it could be ordered through a bookstore. Um, it was published in 2007, so I don't think you're likely to find it sitting on a bookshelf somewhere right now. It sold out in Costco during the book tour way back then, but it's still available as a book. And then I guess keep your ears tuned for um, another way to hear it.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
I think with a couple of searches and a couple of clicks, you could quite easily find it and get hold of it pretty easily.
yeah, yeah.
And I'll put up a couple of links so people can get there a little bit simply. Um, also, and do you have you have like a Facebook group as well, right? Like a
I
kind of
do.
support. Yeah. Let's talk about that.
Yep. Okay, so it's not huge, and it's just been one that we've kind of just been inviting people to as I've been helping them. Um, it's turning into a good community. So we have Feel Better with Autumn Stringham on Facebook, and in the Feel Better group, um, it's just a lot of people like me who are just at different stages of healing. But we have a fantastic open chat on Monday nights. And so every Monday I go live on a Zoom, and it's not recorded. It's really, we try to keep it private, but we get a pretty good group conversation going on there. Some people are willing to share a little bit about wherever they are at with their struggle, and other people are flies on the wall and they just kind of want to listen in. But it's turning out to be something really special. And we have great conversations, everything from renegotiating your marriage after you get better, figuring out how to be healthy in a healthy relationship, all the way through um, yeah, I was on an SSRI and I keep sweating at night.
Okay.
Like really
Sure.
simple stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Now, I think finding your tribe and finding a community is a step towards, normalizing what we just kind of spoke about. I think that's a really, really important part of the process, and you shouldn't go through anything that's quite significant on your own.
yeah.
So yeah, that's wonderful, and we'll obviously make sure that people can get hold of that as well.
Please do. I would love that. Any new friend is welcome there.
That's lovely. Well, that's about it for today. Thank you so much for joining us today, Autumn. Do you have any closing remarks?
No, other than just there isn't anybody that I've ever met that's beyond hope or help. It's possible. And if it's not working for you, there's a reason. So you got to figure it out and be open to suggestion, right?
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much again. That's awesome. So, for more information on anything that we've spoken about in this episode, please see the show notes and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't yet. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. This is True Hope Cast, the official podcast of True Hope Canada. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Simon.